Okay, so Mark chapter 8, we'll read 27 through the end of the chapter, and then go back and talk about it in the stages, it's the sections. It says, when Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi, and on the road he asked his disciples, saying to them, "Who do men say that I am?" So they answered, "John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said to him, "You're the Christ." Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you're not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." When he had called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man will also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Okay, so we have the setup here where the setup for this scene, that the altercation. And really, I don't want to dismiss what's going on in 27 through 30 by just saying this is simply a setup. It is a setup in the form of the text, but these are important ideas that are being taught here. It's a situation where Jesus is using, again, he's coming to the disciples and he's teaching them, as he has for, I'm not sure how long, probably close to a year at least by now. And he is going to be, overall, it's about 3.5 years that he's teaching them about the kingdom and correcting a lot of ideas that they had. And he doesn't spend a lot of time saying that's wrong, you're thinking wrong. He just goes ahead and teaches them the positive aspects of it and hopes that they will get it. And he does this through parables and all kinds of ways that we can see. And so we have in verse 27, he asked his disciples as they went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi, he said, "Who do men say that I am?" So why was it important to know what other people thought about Jesus? What do you think is the purpose that he would have? What does it matter what other people thought? If it mattered what they thought, it certainly didn't matter what they thought, but why would they care what everyone else thought about Jesus? Any idea? It doesn't say. That's why your guess is as good as mine, but it's good. It's a good thought to put out. Why would he care what other people thought of him? Okay, so in their teaching, they would know what these people believe, which is a great starting point, right? You have to know what people believe, all right? And he's also introducing the idea so he can ask the question of them, right? But it is interesting that he asked, what's everyone saying? And of course, I think that could be the reason. It's a teaching opportunity. He wanted them to recognize what people thought. We have information. It's really easy for us. This is, they call it something technical, and I can't remember what it is. It's like the burden of information or something like that, where typically as humans, the things that we know, we assume other people know. And this is one of the problems with raising children. We assume children know what we know, and so it's easier for us to be impatient with them because they should have this by now. I do this with Carla all the time in her office because she asked me a question on a computer, and my first thought is, why don't you know this by now? She hasn't been doing it for 20 years, right? She hasn't been using a computer like that. So we go through it, and I get frustrated sometimes, and I have to go about and apologize and all these things. It's the burden of knowledge. I know it. I assume that she knows it, and I don't really know what she doesn't know, and that's what we do. And so here's an opportunity for Jesus to help these people recognize when you're teaching other people, you got to know what they think, right? All right, so that could be it. Any other thoughts about why he would say that? or why he would ask that? Well, let's look at the next question. So in verse 28, it says, they answered John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, others one of the prophets. All right. What does it say about the way people thought about Jesus? By these answers, what are they thinking about Jesus? He's not what he is not what they think he is, right? So there's a miscommunication, misunderstanding. They thought he was John the Baptist. Look over in Matthew 14, verses 1 and 2. This could be what they were referring to. And this is about Herod the Tetrarch. It says, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus and said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him. So Herod thought that Jesus was John the Baptist who came back from the dead, and that's how they explained his powers. How would that explain his powers? It's superstitious, right? So he comes back from the dead, and now because he comes back from the dead, he's able to do all these different miracles and stuff. And so this has got to be John the Baptist. It's the only way he could explain it. It shows the mentality that they had about, the supernatural and the superstition, that kind of thing. But what does it say about Jesus, the fact that they would look at him and say, it's got to be John the Baptist who came back from the dead? What does that say about his abilities? Does it authenticate his abilities and his power? Sure, yeah. It does. Because they were saying, he has supernatural power. Yeah. So he must be John the Baptist. They're trying to explain his power somehow, and they're grasping at whatever they can figure out. And the first thing they think of, or at least Herod thinks of, is, well, that's got to be John the Baptist. He probably was terrified about the idea because Herod's the one that had John the Baptist put to death, right? Now he's coming back, and you can imagine him taking a step back, say, oh, what am I getting myself into here, right? And so there was a lot of things going on here. But here's the thing. This is interesting. In all the passages in the Bible that talk about, especially in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that deal with Jesus and his miracles, it's never a question of whether he does the miracles. It's always a question of how he does them. And they have all kinds of explanations for that. There's ancient texts that state that Jesus, when he went into Egypt as a child, the Egyptians got him, and with their magics, they put magic things under his skin, like little capsules. They stuffed it under his skin so that later on he could use that in his miracles. That's how some people were trying to explain it. They had all kinds of reasons to think, ways to explain Jesus' power. But they never questioned whether or not he could do it. That's significant, isn't it? There's people going around today. Maybe you've heard this before. There was an atheist who was, he famously, I don't remember who it was. I think it was I think it was Bertrand Russell. I don't know. Anyway, he said, if God was real, you would think that he would put his name on something or something. Give some kind of indication that he did it. It's like you're walking down a stream and you pick up a rock and it said God was here. Why didn't he do something like that so we would know that it was him? Well, the answer would be, if he did that, you would just say somebody scribbled it in and God didn't do it. But the real answer is what? The rock that he's holding is proof, right? The very fact that you're here and exist. So it's really strange, but there are a lot of people who say, one of the things that I hear a lot is there's no evidence that Jesus existed. Now, there are atheists who actually defend Jesus and say he was alive, he was real. But there are people who say he didn't even exist. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The historical record is there. It's certainly there. Yeah. And this is what kills me, because they'll say things like there's no evidence that Jesus was here. Well, is this not evidence? Of course it is. They say, well, that doesn't count because you believe that. It's the Bible. You can't use the Bible to prove the Bible. Well, that's just not true. You would use the Bible to promote evidence, to provide evidence of reality, and this is what we see. We see it right here. And this is evidence, and the evidence, it doesn't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, because we all know that things could have been changed and written and all kinds of different things. But the evidence is clear when you look, especially how we got the Bible, where it came from, the attestation, the people in other parts of history that have attested to the life of Jesus. We have all kinds of things that show that the Bible is real. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the extra biblical evidence Jesus lived.
Yeah.
He was a man. He actually existed. You can deny that if you want, but
it's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. Yes,
Yeah.
It is.
Okay. I saw a thing today, I think it was this morning, from a man named Pliny, who was some kind of a Roman politician. And he was a governor, I think is what he was. And he was writing to the emperor, telling his account of how he's taking care of the Christians, the Christian problem. And so what he's trying to do is to eradicate Christianity, and he calls it a superstition. He says, I think that we can nip this superstition in the bud, is basically what he's saying. And he gives a long list of the things that they did. In it, he explains how Christians behaved. He said they would come together on Sunday before sunrise, and they would sing songs of worship to their God, to Jesus, as if he were a god. And they would commit themselves to doing good deeds and to avoiding sins. And he said nothing that you would see would be bad, but it's a superstition. And so we want to eradicate Rome of this superstition. It's dangerous because he said the reason it was so dangerous was because it was infectious. People all around were just drawn to it, and which is exactly what you'd think would happen. And they talked about how they would gather together and they would sing songs of worship and do these different things in private, and then they would break, and then they'd come back together and have a meal together and spend the rest of the day and spend time together and eating and doing all the things like Acts said that they would do. So we have external evidence of Pliny. We have other people who've said certain things too, and that really is neither here nor there. But it is interesting when you look at the evidence that's here. It's never questioned in history. It's never questioned about whether he existed or whether he did great things. The question is, how did he do those things? And there are a lot of people who gave explanations. If they're trying to explain away his power, that's evidence that he had some kind of power, or they wouldn't be trying to explain it away. And there's no other way of looking at it. No one would ever spend a moment of time trying to explain away my powers, because I don't have any, and I've never demonstrated any. But they did with Jesus. So, all right. So to look at their answers, that's why they thought he was John the Baptist. So coming back to Mark chapter 8. Yeah.
Jason, I remember running across a comparison between just based on the number of documents available to talk about Jesus. And there's no other person in history that comes close to having as many documents written by him as Jesus does.
Yeah.
Just the Greek manuscript alone is about 5,600. And then with all the Syriac documents, those total about 19,000.
Oh, yeah.
The person who comes in second place in all of human history in terms of how many documents written about Julius Caesar, and he's only got about 500.
Yeah, his stack is this, and Jesus's is this. I mean, it's a huge difference. There's a book that I would recommend if you're interested. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'll have to get it back later. But there's some really good books out there. This one is a man who's a crime scene investigator, and he laid out the case for Christ just from perspective of if the death of Jesus were a crime scene, what would be the evidence that it actually happened? And it's overwhelming. It's incredible, powerful when he goes through that. Sorry, Stalmer, Stovall. I don't think it's Strobel. It might be. He does one for the case of Christ, but there's another one. Because he's an investigative reporter. This guy is actually a crime scene investigator, so it's different. But yeah, that is another one. Strobel is a really good look at that. He also says that they also say that some say he's Elijah, Okay, now let's think about this one. We have John the Baptist and we have Elijah. What was the role of John the Baptist? Prepare the way for the Messiah. What was the role of Elijah? The same, right? So they were essentially the same, not the same person, but the same function. What does it say about their thinking about Jesus if they're calling him Elijah and John the Baptist? They don't think he's the Messiah, but they know there's something really powerful about this guy, and they're waiting. I can't imagine what the Messiah would be if it wasn't Jesus. I mean, what would you say to answer that? Couldn't be. It had to be him, but that's how they saw it. And then others, one of the prophets. You know, in the book of John, he gives several times, he gives arguments that people were giving against Jesus. And he never clarified them. He never said, but that's not true. He just left it as it was, and he knew that people reading that would be able to research it themselves and figure out if it's true or not. Anyway, this is one of those times where they said that maybe he's just a prophet, but something was going on. And he said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered and said to him, "You're the Christ." And this was a monumental confession that he made, because no one else was really seeing that or saying that. And it's fascinating to look through this. What is this question that Jesus asked? What does this question do for them? Why would he ask this question? Who do you say that I am? He's already established what other people say. And he moves to, what do you say? I think he's probably making a contrast between what they believe and what everyone else believes. He's showing that there's a difference here in you and the rest. Because he knew what they believed. And now they're believing. He makes this great. Do you think the other apostles believe that? I do. He's the only one that said it, but Peter's the one that he spoke what everyone else thinks, right? Yeah. That's right. So they early on believed that. And Jesus was amazed, and he said, "You believe even because of this?" Yeah. He said, "You're going to see greater things than this." Yeah, yeah. So there were a few that's right. They're following that idea. All right, let's go ahead.
I think even though the apostles recognized him as the Messiah, they were looking for the Messiah instead of the earthly king. And
Yeah.
to overthrow the Romans.
Yes, that's a really important idea.
The Romans and the Jews, we can't imagine how much they hated them.
Yeah. Well, so this came out in the seminar. Jesus said that there would be false messiahs, and he illustrated some of those. They were false messiahs before Jesus came. They're false messiahs after Jesus. But what were they trying to do when they were claiming to be the Messiah? They were gathering an army.
Right.
It's exactly what they thought would happen. So the people, the times were ripe for the Messiah to come. It was perfect timing. It was in a powder keg, which is exactly what God planned. Yeah. But how did they know that the Messiah was about to? They knew the Messiah was coming, but how did they know? Because the prophecies of Daniel and Zechariah and all those other places, they understood exactly what it meant, and they were ready. And very good. So he's wanting them to make a confession of faith. And that's a very important step, because it's easy to think something, but when you say it out loud, that's when things get serious. So you husbands, you men, when you first told your wife that you loved her, were you the first one to do it, or was she? Probably you. I always tell Carla, she'll tell me every now and then, she says, "I love you," and I'll say, "I said it first." But did things change when you said that? Yeah, things change. You get a little more serious when it's stated out loud. That's a good point. All right, look in verse 30. He strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. Now let's look in Matthew chapter 12, 15 through 21. Here's one explanation for that. It says, Matthew chapter 12, verse 15, when Jesus knew it, he withdrew from there, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. Yet he warned them not to make him known, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him. He will declare justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and smoking flax he will not quench, till he sends forth justice to victory, and in his name Gentiles will trust. Okay, what is the prophecy saying here about the Messiah, about Jesus? In generalities, what's his behavior going to be like? Okay, he's not drawing attention to himself, and he's not one who's out fighting and quarreling. And well, did Jesus teach publicly? Of course. But we're talking about attitude, right? We're also talking about the fact that he was gentle with people. Now, he could break people over the coals. We see that from Matthew 23. But generally speaking, he was calm and didn't want to hurt anyone. And now he's very careful not to even break a bruised reed, he says. But until he sends forth justice to victory, until that time when justice prevails, when the resurrection evidently comes about, he was quiet in his demeanor, and so that's one reason he didn't want them to go make a huge scene in the area around them. All right, seems a little bit odd because he's trying to get the message out, but at the same time he doesn't want to. He's trying to strike a balance, I guess. What's another reason that the Scriptures teach? That's just one. Do you know of any other reasons the Scriptures say why he might not want them to know, or he might not want them to say? Okay, yeah. They wanted to make him king, like in John 6 when they wanted to do that? They came to make him king by force, and he said, I don't want anything to do with this. He walked away. That's another example. So he had to, it's kind of a timing issue, right? That would be a third. It would fit there. The timing would be, you have an explosion in popularity. You also have an explosion in people who are against you. So there is a growing, especially in the book of John, you see a growing, both sides are growing. And it's getting kind of up to a fever pitch. You have people who are 100% for him and people 100% against him around the time of his death. So it's a timing issue. It's part of it. And he knew exactly how it was going to work. And, all right, any other ones? There's a really practical one. Yeah.
I was going to say that the timing issue is biggie because there's like 300 different prophecies that Jesus had to fulfill. He didn't fulfill the very last one until he was on the cross. Okay. So.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
So,
essentially, that's true.
Everything had to happen the way that it happened in order for him to indeed fulfill all righteousness.
And he knew exactly how that was going to have to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So he had to have time to be able to train them, which means he need to have time with them. And like you said, he had to have time to rest. And that's another one the Scriptures point out. He wanted to get off by himself, but he could never do it. They just flocked to him. And so he's telling people all the time, don't go saying anything. Don't tell anybody I'm here. He didn't want them to know because he's going to be inundated with people needing to be healed. Do you think that he was ever tired? You think he ever got exhausted from dealing with the people? Okay, no offense to y'all because this has nothing to do with you, but on Sunday evening, after I've dealt with you all day, it's just me. It's my personality. I sit down and I put myself in a cave. I want to be alone, right? I can't imagine Jesus dealing with people all around, all the time. Never, I can have a little bit of sympathy for like Hollywood people, famous people, and they sought it. But Jesus, he's trying to do his thing. All right. Anyway, here's a question, and this is kind of a trick question, so just think about it. If they were not allowed to tell people he was the Messiah, what were they preaching when they were sent to other villages? Teaching and doing. He told them to be quiet. Yeah. 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 Right. And that, yeah, you're right. So, Joe, what do you say?
I mean, Jesus' fundamental message was repent because the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Yes. His message wasn't, look at me. His message was the kingdom is coming. Yes. He was establishing the kingdom. So a change happened around Acts chapter 2. The message of the apostles was no longer the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's already here. What was their message after that? Jesus is the Messiah. That was the message from then on. So the timing was after his resurrection. And actually, technically, he wasn't the Messiah until everything had been accomplished. And that included his resurrection. He was the Messiah, but he wasn't fully the Messiah until that resurrection and the ascension of Jesus to sit at the right hand of God. That's when he actually officially became the ruler of everything. That's how they saw the Messiah. And in tradition, Jewish tradition, that's when they were called the title Son of God, although he was before that too. But everything its fulfillment came in his death, burial, and resurrection and ascension. That's an amazing 40 days of humanity that the whole world pivots around those 40 days. Yeah. Or maybe you say 50 days because of the establishment of the church that came 10 days later. So that was their message that they had to teach and preach, that the kingdom of heaven was at hand. John the Baptist, remember when he was in prison, he sent disciples to ask Jesus, are you really the Messiah? What was Jesus' answer? He had the same kind of answer he told them to say, don't tell anybody. He didn't even tell John the Baptist. What did he say? Look at the things that I do. Yes. You have to make up your own mind. I'm not going to tell you. Later on, they started telling people plainly. But until that point, he made them make up their mind. And it would be so much easier if he just went around telling everybody, hey, I'm the Messiah. Watch what I can do. But he didn't do that. Yeah. It's fascinating. They had to come to that conclusion. Yes. After that, what evidence did they provide for this conclusion? The same evidence, but mainly it was the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's what they talked about. They talked about his miracles and things, but they talked about Jesus and his resurrection. And Jesus himself said that he spoke to them in parables, but now he's going to start speaking to them plainly. And he said, after this, you will speak plainly to people. And so the parables was parables that he's meant, but he also meant in the sense that he's being very, you'd almost say secretive about who he was until the time was fulfilled for him to declare it. And that just made me think of another thing. Do you remember what he said to the apostles about the secret things and being proclaimed on the rooftops? He said that was the nature of the kingdom. So the things you say in secret will be proclaimed on the rooftops, and vice versa. I think that may relate to this as well. So he had a definite plan. Maybe it would be good for us to examine that a little bit more. All right, so then we have the altercation, 31 through 33. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed after 3 days, rise again. Okay, let me try to ask this without being blasphemous, because I do not intend to do this. If Jesus did not know through supernatural means that these things were going to happen, how could he know? He just read the Old Testament. Yeah. So were all these things talked about in the Old Testament? Every bit of it. Every bit of it. Everything he taught them was directly from the Old Testament scriptures. And in fact, when the apostles went around teaching, and Paul even said about Timothy, he said, from childhood you've known the scriptures to make you wise unto salvation. How did it make him wise? Because everything was laid out. That Jesus was going to do, the things he was going to teach, the way his demeanor, everything was going to happen to him. It was all laid out. And that's why the Old Testament is so important. It helps us understand Jesus more clearly. And so if we read the Old Testament and we don't get Jesus out of it, we need to go back and try it again, because we don't quite have it down. So we have this role of scriptures that's so important to them and to us as well. And we see that when Jesus spoke about his death, Peter rebuked him for it. What does it show about the way Peter saw the role of the Messiah? Why would Peter rebuke Jesus over this?
Well, Peter at that point, he's looking for.
Evidently, that's what it's coming from. It's like, you can't do this. What are you talking about? Can't happen. Do you know that there are some rabbis in his time and even afterward that believed that there were two Messiahs in the Old Testament? Because they saw one that was ruling the world and saw another one that's suffering. And so they had a hard time putting those together. He had a hard time doing that too. When Jesus was raised from the dead, everything fit like a puzzle. There was a ruling Messiah who was killed. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the scriptures say that. Yeah, that's right. I've often wondered, wouldn't it be cool to sit down and hear a sermon from Jesus? But I was thinking about Paul. What would that sermon be like? How long would it be? How many scriptures would there be? What would he say? And I would think that he would just go through and explain. Wouldn't it be odd? Wouldn't it be wonderful to just hear from their perspective? This is all the Old Testament says about the Messiah and how it all came and were fulfilled. And that would be majestic, I think. Okay, so why did Jesus call Peter Satan in this context? The word Satan means adversary. And the way he uses the word, he was actually calling him the name Satan. He wasn't just saying you're like Satan. He's saying he called him Satan. He's directly addressing him. He said, "Get behind me, Satan." So he was behaving like Satan, obviously. But why? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. This may be a little side point, but you know, in the book of Ephesians, Paul makes a big deal about, he repeats several times the idea of the prince of the power of the air. He talks about the idea of the spiritual forces in darkness and the air, and he uses the word air, or the atmosphere, the where the birds fly, a few times. And the idea is that this is Satan, that is Satan's domain. That's what he says. And of course, Jesus is superior to that. He is beyond that. But the idea is that everywhere you breathe air, well, that's talking about the physical realm, right? So the physical realm is where Peter was all about. This is what's such a problematic thing with people waiting for Jesus to come back and establish a kingdom, because one, it's already done, and two, Jesus doesn't need an earthly kingdom. Why would he set up an earthly kingdom? This is Satan's domain, and he'll have it until the end of time when it's destroyed, to some degree anyway. All right, he called him Satan. How does this parallel the temptation of Jesus in Matthew chapter 4? This is a thinker. What were the temptations in Matthew 4? Satan offered him what? So the bread, then what was the second one? Fall down and worship him, and he would give him what? All the nations. The third one was throw yourself off the temple, right? I think one of them lists them in different order, but so what the second one was about bowing down and worshiping so that he would get what? All the nations. Isn't that related to what Peter was thinking? He needs to have all the nations. He's going to rule over all the nations. So I don't think that Jesus was tempted by that, but he had that temptation before, hadn't he? Something similar. I think it's kind of a fascinating parallel. And then he gets into the true disciples in 34 through 38. He says in 34, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. What does this self-denial imply? How far should we be willing to go with this? All in.
Yeah, as long as the Lord's number one in our lives, I mean, that's what he's at.
Yeah. I was having a discussion this morning with a guy. We were talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he was all worried about politics and all the bad stuff that could happen. And then we happened to read that passage, and I said, do you think that this has any relationship to what you were talking about earlier? It's like, yeah, I guess so. What was their attitude? Why were they thrown into the fiery furnace? They refused to worship an idol, and they said, I don't care what you do to me. Even if God doesn't save me, I'm still going to kill me. Fine. So I said, is it possible we'll be thrown into a fiery furnace? Not literally. Probably not literally. You never know. But the question is, would we actually respond appropriately and say, okay, fine? And I've had this discussion with him and myself many times. Like, how would you react? How do you know how you'd react? You don't really know until you're there, one. But two, you can know to some degree because you can look at the things that cause you to stumble now. You know, I shared with you, I think, the guy in preaching school, the teacher that said, how many of you would die for Jesus? All of us raised our hand high. And then he said, why do you still have a problem with sin? And the implication of that is it's a whole lot easier to say no to sin than it is to say no to the bullet, or to say yes to the bullet, right? Why is it that we give up so easily when we're faced a little bit of temptation? We do that sometimes. And so I don't mean that we can't overcome that. I mean that we need to work on that. And the stronger we get, the more likely it is that we're going to make the right decisions when harder times come. Because as we say, there are always worse times than now. There can always be worse times. It can always get worse. That's just reality. It can always get worse. And not that it's bad now, but it could get worse. And so we need to be ready for it. And the only way we can be ready for it is to prepare ourselves in advance the best that we can. And I believe that God does prepare us. He helps us. He prepares us. He gives us opportunities and challenges to make us stronger if we would take advantage of that and actually get stronger. That's the point. Say that again. Yeah. If we stand now, we will be able to stand later. But yeah, if we already are compromising now, and things get worse, we know what we're going to do. It's just a matter of degree, right? All right, I think that's the end. We got almost all the way through, but thank you for your participation.